Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leveraging Technology to Enhance the PBL Experience. My name is Maggie O'Brien, and I'm going to hand this over to Megan Raftery, who will be your host for the day. Megan, I think you're on mute right now, just so you know.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Megan Raftery, and I'm pleased to welcome you to Leveraging Technology to Enhance the Learning Experience. Before we begin, now's a good time to review some of the technical aspects of today's presentation, so please check the audio setting on your computer, as well as your speaker volume settings if you're having any audio trouble. If you're still having issues, please visit the Zoom Support Center at support.zoom.us. That's support.zoom.us. If you have a question at any point for our speakers to answer during the Q&A session, you can type it right in the chat box. And if that's not working, you can also use the Q&A box. We'll respond to the questions as we get to that Q&A portion. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be emailed to you and accessible on our site within the next 48 hours. So I'd like to start off by introducing myself and our two presenters, Rachelle, Dene, Poth, and Maria Flaherty. My name is Megan Raftery, and I'm a freelance educator and curriculum consultant. I currently serve as an innovation coordinator for Virginia Beach Public Schools in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and as a trainer and content developer for Define Learning. Rachelle Dene Poth is an educator, consultant, author, and attorney. She's currently the Spanish and STEAM What's Next in Emerging Technology teacher at Riverview Junior Senior High School in Oakmont, PA. Rachelle is an ISTE certified educator who served as the president of the ISTE Teacher Education Network and served on the leadership team for the ISTE Mobile Learning Network. Rachelle received a 2019 ISTE Making It Happen Award and was named one of the 30 K-12 IT influencers for 2021. Rachelle is the author of 5 books, which you can learn more about on her site, which we will share at the end of the presentation. Maria has been in education for more than 30 years as a classroom teacher, instructional coach, and STEM coach. She's currently the project-based learning coach for the Fallbrook Elementary School District. She is an impassioned educator and learner who aims to develop students and teachers who are enthusiastic about learning. Today's webinar will be in a Q&A format. I'm going to ask Rachelle and Maria questions on how they leverage technology to gain their insight and best practice on how other districts can achieve these goals. So we're going to start off with a question. There's a lot of questions about what the world of work will look like in the future and about what skills our students will need. So we'll start in this one to Rachelle. What type of learning opportunities do you believe students need to best develop the skills they might need in the future?
Yeah, that is a great question, right? We've heard so much for how long now, like 21st century skills, future ready, like what are the jobs, what's going to be out there by 2020? And here we are in 2021, and now it's like by 2030. And for me, as a language teacher, I also teach a STEAM course to 8th graders. A couple of years ago, I started to make a lot of changes in my classroom because even though like I love Spanish, but in high school I took French. And if you would have told me that years later I'd be teaching Spanish and be teaching, let alone, a different language from what I took, I would have never believed it. And so when I'm teaching my students in my classroom, I love Spanish and I want them to love it, but I know they're not all going to go on and major in Spanish or minor in it or become Spanish teachers, even though I wish that some of them would, because there's definitely a need for more language educators in the world. So I decided I needed to start doing some different activities and bringing in different opportunities for my students years ago beyond just the content, and looking at, social emotional learning, for example. Somebody asked me a couple of years ago what I was doing in my classes to help students to build their SEL. And I didn't really understand what that meant at the time because I was focused on like just the letters. And then when I researched it, I realized, okay, I was doing some things in my classroom to help students build those skills. And the reason I bring those up is because social emotional learning skills are directly connected to like these future ready skills. Because when you look at, I've done some research on future of work, future of education, and come across, the 2022 skills outlook from the World Economic Forum. And the top skills that employers want are things like, problem solving and teamwork, collaboration, communication. And those tie into like students building their social emotional learning skills in our classroom through things like social awareness, self-awareness, decision-making, relationship building, all of those things that we can provide opportunities for them in our classes. And I think that all educators, regardless of, elementary, high school, whatever content area you teach, higher education, I mean, it's still, we're all learning together. I think whenever we can give students the chance where they can interact with one another, they learn to communicate in different ways, whether it's, in person or using technology. They build their awareness of the world around them beyond their community. They learn to make decisions. They deal with struggle through learning, which is uncomfortable. And as educators, I mean, there's lots of different ways that we can do that. It's not all about the technology, because we know technology doesn't always work. So we always have to have, 3 backup plans to every backup plan. So and I don't want to go into too much here on this first one, but it's about just having some tools and methods in our toolkit that we know that can enable us to kind of transition if our learning environments transition, and that gives students a lot of choices to kind of learn and grow at their own pace and in their own ways. And I think that will help them to develop those skills they need, not just in the future, but that we need today in our classrooms and in our daily lives, for sure.
So Maria, how do you provide opportunities for your students to build future ready skills in your school district?
So like Rachelle said, we really don't know what the future workforce will look like. As Maggie mentioned, or you mentioned, that I've been in education for over 30 years. And if someone had told me that I was eventually going to become a STEAM coach, a project-based learning coach, a distance learning coach, I would have just had a puzzled look on my face like, what are those? Because those were not things that existed when I started teaching. Technology was the reel-to-reel movie projector. So, I mean, it was a totally different world. So, but the skills, like Rachelle was talking about, like the problem solving has always been a needed skill. So we need to teach our students to be problem solvers, and the soft skills that go along with that, like creativity, perseverance, learning how to bounce back from failure, that flexible thinking, all the communication, collaboration, and student leadership. I love this quote from A.J. Giuliani. He says, "Our job is not to prepare students for something. Our job is to help students prepare themselves for anything," because we can't imagine what kinds of jobs they're going to have, but we know these are skills that are going to help them with whatever future career that they might have. My district, Fallbrook, is a Leader in Me Lighthouse school district. And so in every school, starting in kindergarten, we are developing leadership skills. Students are given opportunities to lead, to find their voice, opportunities I wish I would have had when I was a student. Project-based learning is a wonderful opportunity to develop these skills. We want to make sure that the driving questions, though, that are relevant to our students, that they actually care about the questions and they care about the answers. We want our students applying what they're learning. This creates connections to the real world. Application and connections are the heart of all learning. When we go to Home Depot, Lowe's, or any other home improvement center, we don't say that we're going to go there to do math, but that's actually what we're doing. I actually think we should have a high school course called, Home Depot Math, because there's so much involved in that. You just can't walk in there without encountering math and using math, and then also reaching out to the experts there to help us with those questions that we have. Students also need to determine what they need in order to answer the questions, because they need to become questioners within their adult. They can't just be accepting information. They also need to be learn how to ask questions, because this also leads to new learnings.
Great. I love the idea of Home Depot math. I think we should all start that right away.
I think also that, and Joanne math, something,
Yes. Yep.
because
A little bit for everybody.
Yes.
So I think we all agree that technology isn't the only answer to all of the future ready things that students need, but we do know that technology can help and create more purposeful experiences. So we'll start with Rachelle on this one. Rachelle, how can technology help teachers provide their students with more purposeful project-based learning experiences?
Yeah, great question. And I have to go back to what Maria had said about AJ Giuliani and my whole experience with project-based learning. For years, I thought I was doing PBL. Like, people would say to me, "Are you doing project-based learning?" And yeah, of course, like, doesn't everybody? But I read the book Launch, and I started to realize, and there were some other learning opportunities that I had experienced over that same summer. And the one quote that stuck out to me in that book was, "If you assign a project and get back 30 the same thing, it's not a project, it's a recipe." And I thought, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I have been doing. And so that's when I launched into PBL, and I am by no means an expert in it, but I did invest a lot of time in trying to really do authentic PBL over the years. And what I did in my classes, initially, I explained to them, because I went to, at the time, the Buck Institute of Education, PBL Works, found some rubrics and resources to get some ideas, read some books. I was taking all this information in. And when we started, it had been after I had spoken at this event where other educators had come from, all around the world, and we were communicating using WhatsApp. And I just started to realize, like, these opportunities and this technology enables us to connect with people from around the world instantly. And I hadn't done that in my classroom for a couple of years. Like, I tried to do pen pals, the old school way of writing the letters. And we actually had a letter that was sent and didn't go anywhere except travel around South America for a year. And then it came back to my school. And I thought there has to be a better way to connect students with other students in other classrooms. And so when I started, I used Edmodo, the groups, and I reached out to some different language educators in Spanish-speaking countries, and I found 3 to connect my classroom with. And that was like the first space where we had our own classroom. My students could, interact and introduce themselves. They could ask questions to the other students. It was really meaningful. And I mean, I could tell them what I think that it's like to experience school and life and show videos in these different places. But for them to kind of take that ownership in it and decide what they wanted to focus on for their PBL, then to ask questions and have that space where, I mean, they were safe in that space because I was monitoring it, but they felt comfortable enough to ask questions to those students. And then we added on different tools after that. We added on, Flipgrid. So we had the video. So you're writing and you have those interactions, but we all know how powerful that voice is. So I can read about your experience with PBL, but if I hear you talk about it and I see you in your anime and you're excited, it takes it to a whole new level. And for students and for us as educators, whenever we can use some of these different digital tools that are out there, especially in the past year, it's something that I said quite often was, we don't necessarily know. Well, now we're a little bit better, but before it's like, are we going to be back in our classrooms? Are we going to have to go back fully virtual? How do we keep making these shifts if we're using all of these tools? And I think having a method like PBL where it can sustain those transitions because you have all of these options available, but then having the technology to support it. So if you can't meet in the classroom, you can use a collaborative space. Or if you want to have a conversation, you have these apps, or you can have Zoom. We know we've used all of these. But giving students that meaningful experience, I should say, whenever they're deciding what to study, they're leading the conversations, asking questions of their own interest that they're curious about, and then having that interaction, they're more excited about it. And I've had students who said, I stopped caring about the grades. I just wanted to know, like, what was I going to learn next? Who was I going to connect with? What could I do better? And I was blown away by that. And I thought, I really wish I had been doing like the real PBL years ago, but giving them that chance to explore something that's interesting to them, take the risk. And it's uncomfortable because students are so used to being told in many cases, I mean, at least I was, this is what I want. This is the project. This is how it has to be. This is when it's due. Okay, move on. And when they have such openness to like what that end product or what they're going to share is, it's uncomfortable for some, but giving them the choice and providing some different options where they can build those connections with other classrooms, I think it does add into creating a more purposeful experience for them because they're more invested in it because they're making the decisions about it. So just a few ideas there.
Yeah, so Maria, can you add on to that how you use technology to help your teachers implement PBL with ease at Fallbrook?
Okay, so we have a couple of different approaches to project-based learning. We use design thinking, we use novel engineering. Our new reading program has inquiry projects already embedded in it. And of course, we use defined learning. I love all of them. Novel engineering is uses design thinking to look at the characters in a novel, into a story, and to start looking at their character traits and developing empathy for the characters, looking at the problems that they encounter during the story. And then they also look at, they choose a problem that they want to try to solve, and they brainstorm solutions to it. They make a prototype or design, they test it out, and throughout the whole process, they're always revising it. At the end, the students then take their solution and then they rewrite the ending to the story based upon how their solution affects the plot. So it has a lot of those thinking skills that are involved in it, and it's so easy then to tie into the ELA that you're already teaching. We've used it with picture books and with novels. It can be used pretty much at any grade level from kindergarten and up. Last year, we started introducing defined learning to our teachers. We liked the fact that teachers were able to search for their performance tasks based upon their grade level, the subject, and also by standard. We were fortunate that we shared our district scope and sequence for math and for science with the defined learning team, and they graciously aligned projects for all of our topics that gave our teachers a great starting point for picking a performance task to do. When you see so many things there, it's like being a kid in the candy shop. You don't know, you just keep getting distracted by things. And this really gave, for our starter teachers, gave them a real good starting place to get focused and to choose things. We love that each task has like a career connection so that students can see the importance of their learning and of the projects that they are doing. We love the fact that also that most of the components within defined learning are editable. We had some sixth grade classes that were doing the cereal box, that had designed a cereal box, and the purpose in the original task was to create a cereal box that would be attract children and encourage them to get their parents to purchase it. But because last year we were in the pandemic, we took the information that we learned that cereal sales skyrocketed last year because people were staying home, and a good comfort food is cereal. And it wasn't the children who were eating it, it was the adults who were eating it. And so we broadened we would go and edit the task and broaden it so that students also have the chance to appeal to an adult audience with that. One of the challenges that we had last year, among many other challenges, is that both the teachers and students were on platform overload. They had so many different tools and things to use, and we feared that one more platform was just going to be like that tipping point for them. But we found that with defined learning, so much of defined learning can be downloaded or easily linked, and so we started embedding it into something familiar, Google Slides, and teachers used it within Google Classroom. And it was just so much easier for the teachers, so much easier for the students, especially when once we finally got our students back in the classroom face to face, teachers really wanted something that was tied to their learning, that was motivational and fun. And so defined learning was a great way to do that. We had kindergartners finding out why honeybees are important, second graders looking at how to be veterinarians, keep animals safe, fourth graders designing kites that are both functional and appealing. So during a challenging year, placing the contents on Google Slides made it so much easier for our students and for our teachers. So we are off to a good start for this next year.
Great. Rachelle, we've answered a little bit of this within some of your other responses, but let's focus specifically on this idea of student engagement and creativity. So how can teachers leverage technology to design PBL experiences that drive student engagement and foster creativity?
Yeah, so I know I kind of answered a little bit earlier too, but just in my own experience, what I did, like whenever I set out to do the PBL that first year, which now has been probably 4.5 years ago, I guess, I just started, like I said, with Edmodo. I had a space. So I think, having a space where your students can interact with each other, whether that's Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, finding one space. It might be a collaborative space. Like there's so many tools that are out there that we can choose from, and giving students that opportunity where they can connect with one another, and then taking it beyond our classrooms. And if we can connect, even if it's with another school, like a colleague of ours, and it's, just across town or something, but just giving students a space where they can interact and learn to collaborate, not just with their peers in the classroom that they're used to, but with others, and to learn about each other, because then that ties back in also, like I mentioned before, to social emotional learning. And then when we went beyond that, having the video, like using Flipgrid is a tool that I think is great, because when my students first connected with, just the correspondence in writing through Edmodo at the time, then whenever we had the Flipgrid and they were able to see and hear those students, and we would get the notification of the video, like that took it to a whole new level, because then they were curious about, what the school looked like, what the students, how they were dressed, why they had a big thermos, like, what is that? I'm like, that's mate, and having these conversations. And so they were really interested in that and wanted to learn more about, not just Argentina and their customs and what those students were teaching them, but they also were more invested in learning the language too, because they wanted to talk to them through the Flipgrid videos and use their Spanish and also the English too, because high school kids, that's what they did. But then they wanted to kind of continue to build upon that. And, they walked around our school and they showed these other students, like, this is our library, this is what our cafeteria looks like. They went outside the school. And so they were really creative in creating their messages and sharing them to teach the other students about like what life is like here in our school in Pittsburgh, and exchanging that. And then after we did that and they had the video, and building those relationships, learning about their individual topics, because one thing that we were doing is we were focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And some of my students that were doing this were juniors and seniors. And we have a model United Nations group in my school that several of my students are involved in so many things, but they had been learning about different places or different issues in different countries. And they were able to connect that into the Spanish class with this other PBL. And so it was really meaningful for them, because they were fully invested in it personally, because they were learning about it in their other classes. And it mattered to them because they're making the comparisons between like our life and our community here versus wherever else they were studying. And so that increased their motivation for wanting to continue with the PBL. And then as they processed all of this information that they were learning from, the resources we can find all over the internet through searches, but just those conversations with those students, and then deciding what to create and how to share what they had learned in their own unique way that was, interesting to them, that met their own needs. And for some students, they didn't necessarily want to do a full presentation. Like, do I have to do a PowerPoint, for example? And I said, you can do whatever you want. But they wanted to know right away. And I said, look, whatever you decide, it'll come to you. I didn't know if it would or not. I just figured that was a safer thing to say. I'm like, just keep working, figure out what you're learning, continue to find your resources, information, think about it, process it, and then see, how would you explain to somebody what you have just experienced? What did you learn? And I said, just pretend that they don't want to read it on a board, or they don't want to read a paper. And I had students that did like a watercolor because they were looking at coffee growth and all of this like land regions, and they did watercolors. I had some students that created like these with clay. It was amazing. Then I had some students that just stood and did a presentation. I had some that used a tool, Bunsy, and there was just a big range. And I also had some students that used Flipgrid to make and record videos throughout their experience. And then they shared that with their classmates. And I think whenever, as teachers, because there are so many tools out there, which is great because we have a ton of options, but it can also be overwhelming. And I think if we tend to kind of, categorize some of the tools, for example, and say, okay, so we're going to collaborate. And if you want to collaborate with other students, classmates, or some other students, like my students do with the students in Argentina, here are some options, and name a few and let them pick. And for students that may not necessarily want to use technology, giving them the choice to not really use it at first, and then give them some options, say, hey, I noticed that I have students that love to draw, and they say, can I just draw something? Yes, but how are you going to share your drawing with people who aren't in the classroom? And so kind of building up to that and then letting them see some options. And I've had students who said, I'm not using technology, come back and create with different tools that I've used as a teacher. And I thought, wait a minute, you made a Nearpod? Like, you didn't want to use technology. And I had a student that made the Nearpod to present their PBL, and they engaged their classmates. They had activities, virtual field trips. And it wasn't because I told them to use it. It was kind of like they fell into it because it was one of the options, and something about it, piqued their interest, or they were curious about it. So I think it's not doing all of the things. It's finding, a couple of different ways to communicate, to have something for students to create from all ends, right? So if you have a tool that, like I mentioned Buncee already, but for students that want to draw, there's a drawing feature, and there's all these other options. And for students that want to add in, 3D objects and animations and video and everything all in one, they can do that. And it's about having all of those choices in like one or two spaces, and for students to find something that, meets their interests and their needs, and maybe their time too, depending on, how often they're working on this.
Yeah, some great examples there. Maria, can you give us some examples of how technology has helped you achieve these goals at Fallbrook?
I love listening to Rochelle's ideas. It reminds me of so many projects we've done because, like she said, it's the connection with other students, the collaboration with them, the communication with them. We've done many of our teachers have done the global read aloud, where we connect with another school and we get together and we talk about and write about and share our ideas about the stories. And when you're sharing with your teacher, that's one thing. When you're sharing with somebody else, an authentic audience, they put much more effort and thought into it. They love seeing how they're able to, that they're thinking alike here, or that their thinking is being pushed by some of the questions. We've used Flipgrid. Like you mentioned, we also, for our younger students, we use, well, even for our older students, we use Seesaw, because Seesaw is a good, easy way to collaborate and have a lot of different tools on it. One year we had a class, one of our classes was partnered with a class in Barcelona, and it was American school. So we didn't have a language issue, but we definitely had a time issue because there was no time that they were in class, that we were in class. Somebody was always asleep. So the tools like that just made it so easy, and to be able to learn about the culture that was there, talk about the story, getting all the different points of view was so exciting. We even had kindergartners. I created a project called #ProjectWeather, because in kindergarten NGSS, they have to look at weather patterns. And so our question was, are weather patterns the same around the world? So we went out into the Twitterverse and got classes all around Canada, the United States. We even got some in Panama and in Germany to join us. And through Flipgrid, they shared their weather. I know the funniest thing our students found was what a school in Wisconsin is standing out in the snow. The sun is shining, and they're talking about how it's a nice warm day at 43. And they're like looking at each other like they're in the snow. And one, they thought it was funny that the sun was up while there was snow on the ground, but because some of our students have never experienced snow, but seeing that weather patterns are different around the world, be able to connect with those other classrooms. As I mentioned, we use Define Learning as one of our sources, but we don't use it usually in isolation. We had a first grade teacher who did the animal adaptations task, and she partnered it up with other tech tools in order to deepen and round out the experience. So she partnered it with Zoom Montana, because last year Zoom Montana was offering half-hour Zoom sessions live with a classroom, and she partnered with them, and the zoo educator brought in an owl so the kids could see the owl. She pointed out all the adaptations and body parts and structure and functions, which is a huge part of first grade science, and talking about why they're important to them and the habitat that their natural habitat. The students were able to ask questions about the owls, and they had just as many questions for the zoo educator, like how did you get the job? What did you have to do to get that job? So they used that. So the students had to then research, they had to choose an animal, research. They used Discovery Ed, and then a kid-friendly search engine, Kiddle, to get the information, because they're in first grade. We want to give them a nice safe place to do their research. They made a model of their animal and their habitat, and then they had to assume the role of being a park ranger and share about their animal and share about the adaptations that animal had for their habitat and environment. And they did that all on Flipgrid, so that instead of listening to different groups and students coming up one after another presenting, it was all on a grid. And then during center time, students were able to watch and then respond, comment, ask questions using Flipgrid. Flipgrid also gave parents access to it, so they can watch and see what their students have been doing. And this particular teacher, her school is on a military base, and so they have a lot of deployed parents, and the deployed parents can still have that same connection with their students and their child's learning in school. So partnering at some of these tech tools just makes it so much more powerful. We also had 6th grade classes that were doing the food truck task, and they had to assume the role of a food truck entrepreneur. And they needed to create like a fuel expense chart, create a menu, design company logo, design the actual food truck itself. And in this task, they had many math tasks such as ratios, rates, expressions, and equations. And these concepts in 6th grade, if you've ever taught or done 6th grade math, they get to be very abstract starting in 6th grade. And you really want to ground it in reality and see, like, well, when are you ever going to use these skills? How are these math skills used? And being able to tie it to something hands-on and purposeful adds clarity to the concepts. Since they were in 6th grade, their teachers kind of put them in charge of finding some of the sites. I don't think initially the logo was part of the project, but somebody found a website for making logos. Then all of a sudden, everybody had to have like a logo that kind of symbolized their food truck. But they're at 6th grade, they're able to start digging in, finding the tools. And then, like, if you want to learn about logos, go see the student over here. You had your little classroom experts who could help you out. Somebody had to make a model of their food truck, and some people just wanted to sketch it out using their amazing art abilities. I'm not artistic, but I'm good at digital things. And so some of them use things like Google Drawing. Somebody said, could we make a real thing? Like, you should see materials around like their house and such. And the teachers were like, of course you can. You're just supposed to represent your truck. And then one student said, hey, my brother's been using Tinkercad. I think I could do a food truck with Tinkercad. And then he became like the expert in that. So we use a lot of tools, even though Define Learning might be the starting place for it. We use a lot of tools just to deepen and broaden the project, and for the students to take more ownership of it. And then the students shared everything that they did through Google Slides, so everybody could see their projects. It was exciting to see that I was actually able to go into the 2 classrooms and watch them in action. And it was so exciting just to feel the energy of how excited the students were.
Sure, and more authentic too, to be using those multiple tools to accomplish the task. So what great example. So probably you can use a lot of those same examples to address the next question, both of you, but we know that, the learning, the mode of learning is still uncertain in a lot of parts of our country and around the world. So, in this uncertainty of format, as we shift from home to hybrid and back to virtual and back and forth, that's a lesson that a lot of people had to learn this year in terms of sustainability of methods and tools. So we'll start with Rachelle. What are some sustainable methods or tools that teachers can leverage for that uncertainty, that variety of situations and settings?
Yeah, great question. Definitely project-based learning. I mean, there are a couple things that I was recommending, and even just for myself, when schools closed last March, I teach Spanish, and I'm the only Spanish teacher. My school is small. There's one French teacher, myself teaching Spanish, and I also have the STEAM course that I teach. So I have 4 different levels of Spanish, and in my school, and we use tons of different resources. I mean, the paper, the books, all those materials, and then we do use a lot of different digital tools in my classroom. And trying to wrap my head around, like, how do I do everything that I was doing in the physical classroom in that 42 minutes in this virtual space where I'm not seeing the students and not overwhelm them or their families that are supporting them. And we weren't using Microsoft Teams at the time either. So what I did first was I used Padlet, because for me, since we didn't, I didn't want to dive into like, all right, we just had school Friday, now we're not in school, everybody's going to learn Teams. So my students had been using Padlet for years, and they always laugh and say, Ms. Poth, you always put like 400 Padlets on a Padlet. I go, I know, but that's what's nice about it, because I can just keep adding to it and share that one link that's consistent and keep the information updated. So that was the first thing that I recommended to some of the other teachers, because it was working for me. And so I think if you can find like one space, one tool that enables you to do a lot. So let's say you are using, different tools for game-based learning, or creating presentations or videos or whatever it is. Whenever you can have one space, like I use the Padlet, that everybody knows that that's where you go to find information. And it gives you options for creating a video. Like you can put a Flipgrid on there. You can do whatever you want, whatever that space is, depending on the space, and be able to connect with the students and for them to connect with one another. So that's one thing that I recommend. But as far as, methods of project-based learning, because you can do that in any environment. And I did hear of a lot of friends and colleagues who, their kids were doing things, they're going outside and they were doing like place-based learning and learning about like working outside in the yard and learning about the land and just all of these different really interesting, kind of like reminds me of the Home Depot that you mentioned too before, and like hands-on, meaningful real world work that, like you can do that, and then you can find a way to share it back to your classmates, for example. Things like choice boards are really big, where it's digital, although the first one I made was on paper, and my students thought that they were playing tic-tac-toe for class that day. And I'm like, no, I just did this. It was idea I had, did it really quickly. But things like a choice board where you have different options and students can choose what to work on, especially for like asynchronous learning. Because in my school, we were having Wednesdays were asynchronous days, and I was trying to give students time to get away from the computer and leveraging some of these different, opportunities to maybe listen to like a podcast or something, for example, rather than looking at the screen and writing something. But choice boards, if you have them on paper, that's one thing. If you have them digitally, everybody can access those, we hope. Hyperdocs are another option that I used those a couple of years ago for the first time. And anybody that doesn't know, Hyperdoc is essentially like, you should go to the Hyperdocs website. There's a handbook on it. 3 women wrote it. It's tremendous, but you have students kind of applying their skills and building their knowledge in different ways at their own pace. And you put in different activities, and everything's hyperlinked into typically a Google document, but you can really do that same concept of a Hyperdoc with a lot of these other tools. Like you could use Padlet for that and have different steps. But I had done that, and I was going to be out of my classroom for like 5 days. And I didn't want to give my students just, packets and worksheets and different activities like that, because they weren't going to get the feedback from me, because I wasn't there to have the conversations with them. And so again, like some things I just dove right into it. I didn't really know a ton about it, but I gave it to them, and, I got their feedback, and I said, well, what do you think about this? And the thing about it was they could work at their own pace. If they weren't in class, they knew what they were working on, because it was that period of time to work through that Hyperdoc. Some students didn't like it because they didn't know how to pace themselves through it. So then you just provide the support, or, you work with them one-on-one and say, okay, like chunk this down into portions and try this out. And then they get used to it. But it also worked in the past school year, like last March and April, giving students that time where they could work on their own, wherever they were. They could find whatever the resources were all in that one space. And it wouldn't matter if today, like we're virtual, and then tomorrow, okay, we're back in the classroom. Does that mean that we can't still work on the Hyperdoc? Well, no, maybe we don't just sit in the classroom, work on the Hyperdoc, we do some other activities, but it's still in place. And of course, tons of tools that are out there, and having some like, Maria mentioned like the Flipgrid, which is great. There's so many things that you can do with it. Plus it has all of those other options that you can attach to it, like a Nearpod lesson, a Wonderopolis article, Bunsey is also on there, and many more. And so you can connect like a reading or presentation or a resource or video, and then have students just talk about it. And it's something that doesn't take, the nice thing is when you find tools that either already have templates available, or there's thousands of things in the library. So if you don't have a ton of time, you can try it out and see what it's like, and then decide, okay, are we going to keep going with this, or do I choose another one? But having a few that enable you to really do a lot, that you know that if we do have to transition back and forth, that students will be able to access what they need when they need it, and also being able to, connect with you and their classmates in that process too. So it doesn't require a ton of things, but having, I'd like to say, like 3 to 5 solid, very versatile, multi-purpose kind of options available, because just in case 1 or 2 of them don't work or they disappear, then you have something else as well to use.
Great advice there about streamlining. I think, Maria, can you share some examples of successful methods or tools that helped your teachers and students who were teaching and learning at home during the COVID shutdown?
Yes. So, like Rachelle said, there's just so much out there, and we also have to look at it from the parent perspective. So, one of the first things our district decided is that we're a TK8 school district, is that all students would have use Google Classroom, because we're a Google district. Google Classroom would be the way that we communicate and push out work to our students and collect work from the students, and then we would use Google Sites, and each teacher created a Google site to communicate with the parents. So we would make sure that we use Classroom for the students and we use Sites for the parents. Now, of course, within those 2 platforms, there's so much, Rachelle was saying, that you can attach so much to it to allow that individuality, because you can put anything into them. But at least when a parent was going, they would know, I need to find out what my student is doing. I'm going to Google Classroom. I need information about the upcoming, how they're going to be doing this open house in the spring. I'm going to Google Sites. They knew that those were the 2. We didn't want to overwhelm them with so many things. But then we also knew that our teachers needed a lot of support, especially our primary teachers, because a lot of the kindergarten through maybe 2nd, 3rd grade didn't have like Chromebooks. They didn't have, prior to March 13th, when our school changed. The students had never seen a Chromebook. Teachers had never seen a Chromebook. They've heard about Google Classroom. They didn't really have to know about it, because they were very much into doing what's real in their classroom, the hands-on. But of course, that all changed. So they created a team of 3, and I was fortunate enough to be on that team of 3 distance learning coaches for last year. And that our job was to support the teachers and whatever they would need to make this year not only beneficial for them, but most importantly for their students. I like to think of it like we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just re-engineering it so that the wheel can work on all terrains. And we told them, once we teach you these skills, you can use them, whether it's in-person, hybrid, distance. It can work wherever you are. So during that summer, we offered 14 different topics to our teachers, tech topics, and we leveled it by like introduction or intermediate. We also did it by grade level bands, because how one teacher in 7th and 8th grade would use it would look different than a 1st grade teacher. And because there was 3 of us, we offered like concurrent sessions at these different levels. So we did about 60 sessions that summer before we had to come back in the fall of 2020 on all kinds of tech tools. And we really honed in on a lot of the Google ones, the ones that most teachers would benefit from. They got to kind of pick and choose, and because it was on their off time. Our district paid for them to participate in this. We kept them short. They were just 1 hour, 1 hour sessions that really just geared them up technology wise for the coming year. We didn't really know what was going to be happening that year. So this kind of also like a security blanket for some of the teachers, because we knew that not everyone was going to be able to attend these sessions live. We recorded them. We placed them on a Google site, kind of model how to do a Google site for the teachers. And then we had a lot of new hires during the pandemic. And so they had access to all the recordings that we did during the school year. My team also provided pop-in PDs. We knew that teachers needed kind of ongoing training with some tools, because anybody who's worked with technology for any amount of time knows it changes. We used Google Meets as our platform for meeting with our students, and Google Meets was changing, adding new features to it. Flipgrid is always changing, always adding wonderful things to it. So we did pop in PDs, again, mindful of how precious the teacher's time was and how exhausting the year had been. So our pop in PDs were 15 minutes. So they were very focused. Again, we recorded them. We placed them on the Google site so people could view them whenever they needed it. Maybe they didn't need to know about Book Creator right then, but now, oh, it's getting time for open house. Maybe Book Creator might be a good tool. They can always go back to it and view the recording and use it. We always made it a good habit to visit all the sites, go into the classrooms, see what they're doing, talk to the teachers, finding out how's it going, what do you need, so that we would be real responsive. We just didn't pick our topics arbitrarily when they're saying, oh, I'm having a really hard time figuring out how to get the students to communicate to each other when they're 6 feet apart. They're wearing a mask. How do we do that? So that was one of our pop-in PDs, student communication, student engagement. How do you do that? So our teachers were amazing with it, but now, now their choices they felt the choices were limited, and we try to show them some other possibilities with that. But we used a lot of tech tools, like many that Rachelle was mentioning, like Pear Deck was a big thing for our district, which is comparable to the Nearpod. Pear Deck was huge. Our district purchased it for our teachers. We use Flipgrid, Seesaw, and everything and anything Google, so that teachers could get materials out, students could get materials back from them, students could collaborate, and that they could interact with each other. They so desperately just wanted to be able to interact with each other. I was with some 7th graders for the first time. We did, once we finally got breakout rooms into Google Meet, I was with them to support the teacher and how to do the breakout rooms. And oh my gosh, the 7th graders were just so excited to be with each other in a little breakout room and to be seeing each other in a more intimate setting with that. We also found that something else we pushed out was EduProtocols. And EduProtocols are routines that the teachers were able to choose the ones that, the few that were really spoke to them and they really wanted to focus on for the year. They taught them, and then every week or every other week they did the same protocol, so they didn't have to waste time teaching all the new directions. The directions were the same, the content just changed. So it was more time efficient, and having these kinds of routines also developed a lot of student confidence and independence. And as I said, we're hoping that these tools, again, this upcoming year seems a little bit more known, but just never know. But all the things that we did last year transfer over.
I definitely appreciate the responsiveness of both of your answers in terms of stakeholders. Introducing families into the mix and talking about what they need is really important. And one of those unknowns that we certainly have coming back into the school year is we're concerned, probably as a whole group, many teachers and parents, that as we head into the school year, that students are likely to be pretty far apart in terms of proficiency due to the pandemic and who was learning from home and what type of supports they had and so forth. So we'll start with Rachelle on this one. What tools do you recommend to help personalize learning for that range of needs we're anticipating coming back?
Yeah, well, one that Maria just mentioned, I always, people will say, like, what's your favorite tool? And it's so hard to pick just one. So I always try and find a way to pick like 2 of them. But usually, like, my go-to is often Buncee, because there's so much that it offers and so many ways that you can use it, especially more recently, because I've been talking a lot about social emotional learning, and they just released this SEL resources toolkits for grades K through 6 and 7 through 12 that break them down into the 5 competencies. And so teachers can go and see, like, how can I help students to build, self-awareness or social awareness, and find examples for that. But then students can create on their own, and they can even use them for reflection or creating like a journal throughout the year. But the other one that's like my tie up there is the Nearpod that Maria just mentioned. And in this past year especially, like there's a lot of tools that I have been using for probably the last 5 or 6 years, but that I really focused on more this year because of the type of learning environments that we were in. With my school, the first 9 weeks we were fully virtual. And yes, Buncee, Buncee, I just saw the question. The first 9 weeks we were fully virtual, and then we had 18 weeks of hybrid, and then the last was either in person 5 days or virtual, but students were going back and forth. And for me, like I said, as a language teacher, but even with my students in my STEAM class for that first 9 weeks, I found virtual learning, and this is like odd to say, but I found it to be a little bit easier compared to the hybrid, because at least when I was teaching, I felt like even if the students were on the screen or if they walked away, like I knew that they were all in that same space, getting the message that I was delivering, even if like they did odd things, which they at times did, but it's okay. We're all going through this experience. But then in the hybrid, wanting those students that were at home to feel connected, and for me to be able to assess them, like I said before, like in 42 minutes, I can do a lot of different activities and feel like I've taught and interacted with every single kid in my classroom. And, there's nothing else that they have to do that I need to work on overnight, because I've learned, what their areas of, like what I need to help them with, for example, and I've given them some ideas. But when it comes to Nearpod this past year, being able to launch like a quick activity where I could have students, and I love conjugating verbs. I don't know that they all feel the same way, but I could see all of them writing on the screen. So there wasn't, in the classroom, like, okay, conjugate this verb, and students might not feel comfortable because there's that fear of making a mistake. So as a teacher, being able to see like on my screen, all of their whiteboard spaces with that one question. And of course I get the student that just writes like IDK, but it tells me, okay, I can act on that right now. And I can use, if virtual or hybrid or even in person, I can take that and I can go have a conversation, a one-on-one with a student. Or if I see that all of them are writing IDK, and I say, if you're going to write that, at least write it in Spanish, because like a little bit different, which we're getting better at that. But then I can address the whole class, and it's one-on-one. So Nearpod, because of all the different activities that you can put into it, and regardless of if you are in person, because you can do them live in class, student paced is also great. And then giving students, those open-ended responses, the whiteboards, the collaborate spaces, all of those features that are in it really enable me to provide for each student and to learn where they are in terms of learning. Another tool that was tremendous for me, because giving tests and quizzes and the assessments, especially as a language teacher, the battle with the online translators, and as all educators, we know the answers are all over the internet, the answers to the textbook. So you have to really come up with like really good questions that can't be found on a Google search or through a Google search. And I was very stressed about, how am I going to assess my students in this virtual environment when I can't see them, what they're using. Now, as a language teacher, I can tell when a translator has been used, because if they're in Spanish 1 and they're rating at a Spanish 4 level, like it's, you can tell. But I used formative, and with formative, very similar, like Nearpod, Pear Deck, formative, a lot of them have some very similar functionalities, which is nice. You don't have to use all of them. I like Nearpod because it has the virtual reality tours, so I can take students, all around the world from wherever they are. But with formative, what I really liked about that is, again, asking the questions, and I could scramble the order, and I could see as students worked on it, and I could, again, give them feedback, adapt my lesson or whatever I needed to do at that time. And then moving away from some of those interactive lesson type tools, things like some of the game-based learning tools now are using artificial intelligence, so that when students respond based on their responses, whether correct or incorrect, their response time, you can set it up so that it charts its own personalized path for them based on their responses. So now, in the absence of being in person with our students, technology is great. And there's that whole other conversation about AI replacing teachers, but it can help us to learn about our students faster and be able to act on that and have those conversations. And so using a tool, I think quizzes is one of them. There's a couple other ones out there that you can set that up. And then as students answer questions, it's seeing and it's tracking those patterns, and it can add in and populate more questions for them to practice. So that's helping them to build their skills based on their own needs at the time, especially valuable whenever I'm not in the classroom to see their responses or to have those conversations with them. So I will stop with that, because that was a lot, and we could go on to another whole hour, but there's a lot out there. And if anybody does have questions, feel free to send me a message, and yeah, we'll follow up.
And Rachelle has lots of awesome blog posts and suggestions that have some lists with that really detailed, what would you use this for type information. So again, we'll share her website and Twitter handle at the end, but that's a good teaser for kind of following up with her content moving forward. So we'll give the final word here to Maria in our last 5 minutes. What is Fallbrook doing to anticipate and prepare for that wide range of student needs that you're likely to face this fall?
So we're looking at not going back to normal, but building on back to better. We want to meet the students where they are, which means we need to know where they are. We've already started that in the spring. We had after school sessions because if you have the students face to face, that can be so much more powerful. It's easier to get that formative assessment as to where they are. Sometimes when they do online assessments, I'm not so sure how much assistance they might have gotten. It's not as accurate. Our district is currently in the middle of a summer bridge program using the space theme and some performance tasks from defined learning. So from K through 8, we've got students who are identified as having some gaps that needed to be addressed, and hoping to prepare them for be more ready for the fall. We also want to make sure that we focus in on not only their gaps, we also want to look at their strengths and their talents and their interests and their competencies. And one tool that we use is Thrively. Thrively is assesses a student's strengths. It's very student friendly. We start using it in about second grade. It can be done earlier with a little bit of guidance, and it looks at their strengths, their interests, and possible career choices for them. And then it gives them this amazing paragraph. And the students love reading about themselves because they probably never have read or have heard themselves described in such glowing terms. I did this as an adult, and I'm like looking at it going, oh my gosh. I mean, I was grinning from ear. I mean, it was very impactful in order to read mine, for students to read and hear about their strengths and how they could find it out through this assessment. Parents they're fascinated too when we share it with them, because lots of times it validates what they're seeing at their house, or sometimes it's also giving them some indicators of some things they might want to tap, whether it's within sports or arts or scouting or something like that. I'm just so pleased that our district is acknowledging and that the strengths of their students. They might have some struggles, but they also have so much talent and so much strengths within them. And this assessment also helps us when we're doing our grouping, sometimes with our project-based learning. Helps we can pair students up for different reasons. It's great for when you do genius time. And even just there's a lot of student exploration with those concepts within the Thrively platform. But the key is that students who are motivated, they're going to work harder and they're going to make more gains. I know we're running short on time, but I also wanted to mention that our district is also, every school site is going to have their own literacy coach, their own reading intervention teacher. They already have counselors to help to support that SEL development. They're working hard to make sure that they look for every opportunity to develop those needed areas and to strategize the strengths and interests to keep our students their learning moving forward.
Awesome. I appreciate that strength approach as a mom too, just thinking about how different that would feel to my kids versus going in feeling like they're fixing something. So a great perspective. Thank you, Maria. So thank you to Rachelle and Maria for this insightful webinar. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. If you'd like to connect with Rachelle, you can go to her site at rdene915.com, and she put that in the chat as well. I'll also highly recommend you check out Rachelle's books for more information on topics like some of the ones that we discussed today. And to connect with Maria, you can find her on Twitter at Coach to Learn. The two is TO, Learn. Today's viewers also get a free 60-day access to Define Learning. You heard some good examples for how you might use that tool, both in that virtual setting and in person today. So if you can go to definelearning.com and you go to the login page, you'll enter the access access code DL webinar, all capital letters, one word. Maggie will also send this login information with a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email to everybody who was registered. So we thank you for coming today, and we hope you have an excellent remainder of your day.